But when it comes to the calculation in Washington, they have two sides, the Israeli lobby and the economy forcing
Hmm.
the
Yeah.
administration. And who's going to win? Because let's assume that we've learned from Wall Street Journal that Donald Trump was briefed on, all out war in Iran again. So, but he has decided to continue with the talks. Is it something delusional? Is it something? Is somehow a CIA operation? Because from from what we've heard so far, the stockpile says something else. The reality of the war, what has happened so far. Looking at the reserves of the United States, oil reserves, petroleum reserves, in its it's not there. The picture is not there for Donald Trump to start a new war. And on the other hand, you see Israel talking about the war. Wall Street Journal reporting that Donald Trump gonna start a new war, maybe. What is your understanding of that? Putting all these pictures together.
I don't know, man. Like, I'm thinking, you're friends with Danny Davis, on his show. When a subject like this will come up, they'll put up a card and like sound the horn or an alarm, to warn people that we're discussing Donald Trump. And so anything we say could be completely undone in the next minute by a Donald Trump, Truth Social post. Uh, this is really difficult. This idea of trying to understand what Donald Trump is going to do and what motivates him. I think we keep coming back to the idea that he is motivated by self-interest. And also too, we have to understand, what is he like? What does he want? And he wants to have like what he had last year for Gaza with the Board of Peace, where he had like this big production in Sharm el Sheikh, and all these leaders came and they all stood, like 30 of them stood behind him, and Donald Trump was just able to speak for hours, and then there was processions and there was pageantry, right? That's what Donald Trump wants, and I think that's what Donald Trump wants out of this war. He wants the victory. He wants the ability to stand on a platform someplace in front of all the world leaders and say, I'm the one who ended the war. I'm the one who opened up the Straits of Hormuz. I'm the one who did this, that, the other thing. All preposterous, of course, right? All completely specious, all a fabrication, a lie, a great big farce. But I think that's what Donald Trump wants. And so how does he get that? Now, certainly this idea of his legacy being what he's looking for here, and that he'll make this war and this peace. And, of course, context doesn't matter. History doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that it was his war that shut the Straits of Hormuz to begin with, et cetera, et cetera. It doesn't matter to Donald Trump. He just wants to be able to pronounce himself as the victor and as the peacemaker. And this war and this peace then become his legacy. And he can't do that if the price of oil keeps shooting up. He can't do that if Americans are showing up and gas is $4.50 a gallon here in the U.S. He can't do that if he doesn't get a chance to stand with all these world leaders behind him and laurels been being thrown at him, right? I mean, so how does Donald Trump get that? Now, certainly I think there is the very real possibility, and I know there's been a lot of this clip going around, and certainly things that we've been saying for the last, month or so, that this war could restart after the election. And certainly J.D. Vance gave us that glimpse this week when he essentially said, right now the purpose with this MOU is to get the energy market stable, get our inventories filled back up with oil, and then figure out where to go from there. So certainly this idea that after the election, the Americans may say, you know what? Let's try the war again. Now, what will they accomplish that they couldn't accomplish back in March and April? Absolutely nothing. But this may be where Donald Trump says, you know what, my legacy is better if I try again with the war. And this all depends on what he gets out of this deal, what it looks like. Does he get the Iranians to downblend their uranium and to allow the IAEA back in? And he can present this as the nuclear deal, a better deal than Obama had. I mean, his obsession with Obama is something that we should not at all diminish here. He is obsessed with the man. And, so again, what is Trump's self-interest in all this? Now, the elections, of course, we could ask, well, whose elections? The Americans or the Israeli elections? And I'm not being cute with trying to infer that the Israelis control the American elections, although they certainly do. And there's a panic here in the U.S. because these left-wing Democratic socialists keep winning, and it's absolutely great to see the meltdowns here in the U.S., not just from the Republicans, but also from the Democrats as well. It's absolutely terrific. So just as an aside, but what about the Israeli elections, though? We talked about that for a little bit just before, right? But they are due. I guess earliest would be in September, latest would be in October. So a few months from now. And for Benjamin Netanyahu and his governing coalition, does it make better political sense to start the war with Iran again and just attempt to drag the Americans back in, calculating that there's no way the Americans will not support us? But with Donald Trump, maybe it's the case, as we've talked before, might be a small possibility or a slim chance. But there certainly is a possibility and a chance where with his predecessors, that never existed before, of Donald Trump not supporting Israel. So I don't think anybody has a clear idea of how they want to proceed here or what's going to happen or what their adversaries are going to do, with the exception, I think, of Hezbollah. They will keep fighting. They will keep resisting. The Iranians, I think, will keep demonstrating that they are in control, that they control the Straits of Hormuz. They will close it as they need to. They will shoot at ships as they need to. They will get up and walk out of meetings as they need to. They will let Witkoff and Kushner cool their heels in Doha for a couple of days as they need to. They will continue to show their confidence, demonstrate their control. But other than that, I will also add too, we're coming up, Nima, on Friday will be the 1000th day of the genocide in Gaza. And, the only thing I can say with certainty is that the Palestinians will continue to suffer. So Hezbollah will resist, Iran will remain in control of the Straits of Hormuz, and the Palestinians will suffer. And as far as what the Israelis and the Americans will do, I don't know. I'll add just since we're going around the globe here, the Europeans will be no help whatsoever. I'll add that in as well.
Europe is irrelevant. I don't see Europe being relevant anymore. They're irrelevant. Yeah. Matt, when we think of the West Asia, basically, I think the war has complicated the whole situation in the West Asia. You remember one of the main issues with the Trump administration was the petrodollar, how to keep that in power, how to remain, the oil export, based on dollar and all of that. It was some sort of concern. Saudi Arabia didn't, extend that contract between Saudi Arabia and the United States about selling oil just in dollar, and they're selling to China that in yuan, in Chinese currency right now. And that was the main
and just do you know, we've seen that Iran has pushed through like 50 million barrels of oil in the last week or so.
Yeah. More than 40.
Yeah, okay, 40. Do we know what they're being paid in? Because I've seen different things, about how they're being paid. At one point, they were saying they're being paid in crypto. Have you seen anything definitive on that in terms of how?
I haven't seen anything. Yeah. Even the head of Iranian parliament, who was mentioning that last night, he didn't mention how they're getting paid.
Yeah,
is that because they're basically selling to China? I don't know. I think it's going to be in yuan because they're selling to China. It's going to be in yuan. They're going to keep that yuan to do the exchange. That's my understanding.
Yeah,
because basically to China, and when it was even to India, because I remember when Donald Trump. You remember when they in the initial days of ceasefire, Donald Trump gave this sort of lift the sanctions for Russia and Iranians in the initial days of war, basically.
Yeah, within I think it was like March 6th. They didn't even make it a week. Yeah,
exactly. They were selling oil to India, and India they had to pay Iran in yuan, if I'm not mistaken. During those days, I don't know. They didn't mention. I have no updated information on that. Let's put it this way. But the whole concept of petrodollar, I think, is getting more complicated because when the way that you hit the economies like Saudi Arabia and Qatar, these countries are so important for petrodollar.
Yep.
And this war has hit them. Just it's unbelievable the way that their economy was somehow influenced by this war. And you have that in your calculation, and you have that as a serious problem for the economy of the United States, for the future of the United States, and you have the issue of Israel, both together. These two pictures don't come together because the reality of the Strait of Hormuz has changed, as you mentioned. And they can do, because of the geography. Basically, J.D. Vance said that. We learned something new. The geography matters. So if that's something new for J.D. Vance, so they have to do something about it in the Strait of Hormuz. They have to do something to have some sort of stability in that region. And by supporting Israel, I don't think that they're going to achieve it anytime soon. That's why you put pressure on your allies in the West Asia, basically Saudi Arabia, Qatar, all GCC countries together. On the other hand, you want to help Israel. Israel doesn't see the way that the United States sees the West Asia. Look at the way Israel sees Israel right now. They're talking about two forces in the West Asia. One of them is Muslim Brotherhood. The other one is the Axis of Resistance, Shia. Shia and Sunni, two-part. One of them is supported by Turkey and Qatar. The other one is supported by Iran. And they're against both of them. Basically, they're fighting the whole region, to be honest.
In their mindset, in their worldview, that's the way it's supposed to be. And I think that's one of the things that keeps Israel in this spiral that will eventually cause major, major problems. And I'm not saying this because I have any insight, it's just that I read what the Israeli security people say. And they keep saying that their own people are the problem. And when you have this messianic, righteous world vision that you need to dominate everything, not just the land under your feet, but the land over the horizon, you are this tiny country. You are going to run into problems. And I think that's going to, be essentially internally where they have a lot of those problems. But at some point, maybe they will take on a fight that is too big for them and they won't get the support from the Americans that they need. But their obsession is clear. There's a report today out of I-24 maybe, or one of those really press about how blaming J.D. Vance for letting Erdogan know about the Kurds being used to overthrow the Iranian government. And if people are familiar with this, the Israelis are bent out of shape. They've been bent about this for months now, about with Turkey, and that Erdogan was the one. This thing would have been over in the first week, but Erdogan wouldn't let the Kurds into Iran to overthrow the government in Tehran. And this is all Erdogan's fault. And now, of course, with this positioning of this Vance versus Rubio conflict, right? I mean, you've got this idea, this is Vance is Iran, Rubio is Israel. And now you've got this report coming out of Israeli media today saying it was Vance was the one who told Erdogan about the Kurds were going to be used for, regime change in Iran. And so this is all Vance's fault that this didn't go right. I mean, but that type of hysteria, right? That type of obsessive of clinging to this worldview. Yeah, this is going to be the undoing of Israel. I think most people are I don't think I'm saying anything, but getting back to this idea of the petrodollar, one of the things it's important about it is all those Gulf states, their currencies are pegged to the American dollar. So, if the dollar loses its value, this could be really destructive for those economies. So looking at those states, how do they get out of that tie to the American currency if they choose to, if they want to, but also as well accepting the changing reality. One of the things I saw, it may have been Pepe Escobar who said this. I can't remember, maybe Nima, but this idea that this year at the BRICS conference in September, there will be a real proposal to implement BRICS Pay or whatever they're calling it as an alternative mechanism. In the past, we've seen the BRICS hold back from that about developing an alternative currency that would seek to replace, maybe not replace, that's kind of a strong word because the dollar's reserve status is insured for another decade or so at least, right? Just because of the size we're talking about here, the scale we're talking here. But this idea that the BRICS countries would go forward with creating a real alternative to using the American financial system, to using the financial order, the monetary order, the economic order as we understand it now, they would create an alternative. And from what I remember from that report, that it was the Indians who are the ones who are really pushing it now. And the Indians are taking the lead on this, and the Indians certainly have been very involved in these things before. But the idea came, as I understand it, is this really comes out of the Americans sanctioning or with the secondary sanctions on Russian oil that the Americans produced at the end of last year that are specifically aimed at India, aimed at other countries, but really aimed at India because India was importing so much Russian oil, with the idea of sanctioning Indian companies and banks and institutions, and the Indians understanding the danger in that. I mean, it was right in their face, of course, how they could not understand danger, but also, too, their loss of sovereignty, right? That the Americans can just do this. Well, hey, look, we've got this deal. We're getting good, cheap oil from the Russians, and the Americans are going to stop it. In order to for their war in Ukraine, they're now going to hurt our economy. And unless we do something, unless we fundamentally restructure things and create alternative mechanisms, we will always be at their mercy. So I think this question of the petrodollar, it's certainly been around for, I remember the first time hearing about it, I was in high school during the Gulf War. I'd never heard of such a thing. It was still at that point, even up until I would say, Neiman, maybe even 10 years or so ago, a lot of serious people in Washington, D.C. and in the American corporate media would scoff at the idea of there being a petrodollar, that there was this deal hammered out between the Americans and the Saudis in 1974 or whatever it was, And so, I mean, the implications here for, the Middle East, for West Asia, in terms of where this is going to go. I mean, you're seeing a shift, a remaking of the order that is just not going to be about the United States maybe no longer having their bases in Kuwait and Saudi Arabia. This is much, much greater than that. And certainly we've seen with the Pakistanis, their role with the Saudis, the way the Pakistanis, and then too also with the relationship with Turkey, where Egypt is going to lie, how the Emiratis have decided how it looks as if the Emiratis are going to move forward in all this. Yeah, I think a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, if I'm lucky enough to still be having these conversations with you, we'll be talking about things in an entirely different way.
How do you see, Matt, the outcome of the war for the security concerns on the part of GCC countries? Because basically, before the war started, it was all about the United States supporting them or protecting these countries. Right now, with what has happened, with the bases, with the attacks, which they're basically focused on Israel instead of, helping these countries, because these countries were hit because of the American bases in their countries. Yeah. And right now, how do you see the assessment on the part of these countries as a whole? I'm not talking about particularly about Qatar or Saudi Arabia. I'm talking about as a whole, when you see these countries and how deep they were investing on the United States to help them, to protect them, to bring some sort of security to their countries. And right now, you see the equation is somehow changing. They may, behind the scene, it seems something big is happening between Iran and Saudi Arabia and Qatar. They're not talking about it yet, but there is something going on. I'm pretty sure about that. There is something going on and nobody's talking about it. Yeah. They want to somehow improve the relationship between the two sides. On the other hand, we have the option from China. China could be part of that. Russia could be part of that. How do you see the whole thing? How is that changing? The calculation is changing in the mind of these GCC countries.
I think this has to be a great lesson for them. And so I would suggest that they be very cautious about future relationships with other great powers, with other external powers, Russia, China, whoever, that they need to focus on themselves, rely on themselves, understand that their self-interest is more than likely tied up much more with their neighbors than with any external actor. We can go back to what Mark Carney was saying back in Davos. He's a hypocrite, but at least his words at Davos were where I think were right on. He certainly didn't, follow those words in the last several months. But Carney's idea that mid-sized countries need to band together. They need to recognize that their interests are not the same as the great powers' interests, and that's the way it's always been in history. And I think these countries, whether they knew that the relationship with America was fraudulent, whether they understood just how superficial and hollow the American security guarantees were, whether they anticipated that their countries would be used as a buffer, not just militarily, but also economically in a war against Iran. If they didn't understand that before, then they do now. And now the question begins is just how corrupt are those countries? These are all monarchies we're talking about. That part of the deal for the decades have been since the Second World War has been you be loyal, good members of the American empire, and we will keep you in power. And, are they still going to hold on to that bargain? Are they that corrupt? Right. And I know plenty of people from the region who say, absolutely, they are that corrupt. They will continue with this relationship because that is in what is in the royal family's best interest. I mean, I know you don't want to talk about individual countries, but the one country I know you're not including in this mix is Jordan. We know exactly how Jordan is going to act in all this.